Hello and welcome to the pre-conference preparatory course. My name is Holly Chittum, and I am Project Co-Director for the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition. If you're viewing this module, you have registered for an ABFFC training event, and we're looking forward to meeting you soon in person. In the meantime, we have prepared this preparatory program for you. It is designed to give an introduction to medicinal plant forest farming and some of the topics that will be covered at the event. We hope you find it beneficial. Here's the program agenda for this short pre-conference course. First off, we'll be looking at forest farming in general, and we'll give a definition of it from several different perspectives. Next, we'll give an overview of the main botanicals that are traded, and then we'll have two pre-workshop intensives. The first intensive will be given by Dr. Eric Burkhart from Penn State, and it will be an overview of the medicinal forest products industry and market options for growers. The next pre-workshop intensive will be a demonstration series of planting both by seed dispersal and rhizome division. Then we'll have a preview of the workshop topics and a short page on resources. This resources page will include access information for how to become a coalition member if you are not already. Just as a reminder, becoming a coalition member is free, and it opens up access to a ton of resources that we have online for folks who want to dig in a little bit deeper to any of these topics that we'll be covering today and the topics that we'll be covering during the face-to-face conference. Okay, and let's move on. What is forest farming? Well, the definition likely varies depending upon your perspective and where you fit into the industry. Let's see what these folks have to say about it.
Forest farming to me is growing useful plants of all types, whether it be edible, primarily medicinal, in a forest canopy. So we're in a forest canopy, you have levels of plants growing. So for me, it's what's on the earth on the lower level, the ephemerals, the things that grow in shade. A lot of forest farms have openings for sunlight, so we do some of our sun-growing plants in those areas.
Well, I think forest farming, to me, I've been a forest, as I mentioned earlier, I've been a forest gardener for years. And for me, it's an extension of that. I haven't had a whole lot of land before to work with. I mean, very small plots of land. So forest farming having this piece of property has opened that up for me to larger stretches of land. And it really comes down to growing things that I've played with and tried over the years, and then creating some type of a sustainable crop of these types of things that we then can take to market and use as a source of income. I think that's important. So many of our woodland natives have been sacrificed for the sake of money and to the detriment of their survival rate. So sustainability to me is a big issue.
Well, for us, forest farming is a way to use the wooded parts of our property in a way that is more than just growing wood, fiber, or lumber. It's just a way to use our property is 60 to 70% wooded, and that's true for a lot of the properties in Floyd County. And so if we want to do something besides lumber or wood production and we want to use our whole property, forest farming is a way to do that. So, and it could be growing medicinals, mushrooms, different edibles, crafts. We haven't gotten into that, but we've definitely gotten into the medicinals and the edibles in particular.
And we also like the idea of perennial farming as opposed to annual farming.
Yeah, absolutely. Perennial farming is our approach for the whole property, even the open areas.
My name is John Munsell, and I'm the director of the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition. And forest farming to me is an agroforestry practice that focuses on the sustainable and intentional cultivation of plants and fungi that grow in woodlands. And it's co-managed with the other components of a forest land such that those plants and fungi can be grown to source existing markets with raw material while also managing for other aspects of a healthy forest. So what is typically forest farm is called a non-timber forest product, or NTFPs. You may have heard that term, NTFPs. That is anything that grows in a forest that has some value, some purpose, some use that is not associated with a timber product. Examples include roots for herbal supplements from a medicinal standpoint, fungi such as shiitake mushrooms, things that we can eat, also things that we use to provide pleasant settings, to decorate our tables, vines and flowers, and any other materials that are used to create handicrafts for sale. So anything drawn from the forest that has a market value or personal value that is not associated with timber. And the focus of forest farming is on the sustainable cultivation of those NTFPs over time.
Now we'll take a quick look at some of the main botanicals traded in the medicinal forest products market that are native to the Appalachian region of the U.S. We will briefly touch on a number of plants, but we won't go into much depth. Don't worry about that though, because you'll be seeing these again soon at your event. Our first photo here is of American ginseng. Panax quinquefolius is the scientific name. It's a close relative to Panax ginseng, which is the ginseng that grows in China. Very similar plant. And likely this is the one that, if you don't know a lot about medicinal forest plants yet, is the one that you will have seen or heard about before. Often you'll see, even in gas stations, ginseng supplements or ginseng infused drinks that are marketed to promote energy or support energy. So this is American ginseng. Very often those types of products will not contain plants that were grown in a forest. Nevertheless, they are ginseng products, so likely you will have seen those. Our next plant is black cohosh, or Actaea racemosa. You will often find products containing black cohosh within the women's health section of a natural food store. Next, we have bloodroot, or Sanguinaria canadensis. Extracts of bloodroot have been used in a wide range of products, from oral care, topical skin care, to those used internally. It's also used as a natural dye. Golden seal, or Hydrastis canadensis, has been used in products that are designed for supporting the immune system, for digestive products, and for topical products that are used for wound care. Wild sarsaparilla, or Aurelia nudicalis, has been used as a flavoring for beverages and as a homeopathic medicine. It's also used in traditional Chinese medicine. Solomon seal, Polygonatum pubescens, can be found in products that are used to support respiratory health and inflammation function, and also used in products that are meant as to be astringents. An astringent is a product that's used to draw out moisture. Many of the herbs mentioned here are used domestically, but also used abroad in Europe and in China, and many of them are often used more abroad than they are here. In Europe, for instance, especially places like Germany, more commonly use herbal treatments and herbal remedies than we do in the United States. Mayapple, Podophyllum peltatum, is one plant that is most often exported, and this plant is used to make pharmaceuticals sometimes, and also used in medical research. Blue cohosh, Calophyllum thalictroides, is another plant that you might find on the shelves in a natural products store in the women's health section. Here is a picture of ramps, or wild leeks. The scientific name is Allium trichocum. These are most often seen in the culinary trade. You might see ramps seasonally for sale in small markets. There's a lot of demand in the culinary market for ramps as a seasonal vegetable crop. Stone root, or Collinsonia canadensis, is used in products that are marketed to support urinary tract health. If you've been in a natural food or health food store, chances are you will have seen products that contain material from some of these plants on the shelf in the dietary supplement section. If you haven't done this type of exploration before, we would encourage you to do so as you start to explore the business of forest farming. After all, one key to a successful business is knowing your customer. You may choose to sell your raw material to another company, such as a distributor or an herbal products manufacturer, and they will have a set of requirements and guidelines for the materials they buy. But the customers who buy the end product that are made from your raw material are the ultimate customer in this industry, so it's important to get to know them too. Pre-Workshop Intensive 1, an overview of forest botanical market options.
Good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Eric Burkhart, Penn State University, here to provide a very brief overview of forest botanical markets and marketing options for your consideration ahead of your attendance at an upcoming workshop. Today's presentation will be about 15 to 20 minutes in length, so settle in, get comfortable, and we'll walk through a few slides together. This project and a lot of the instruction that surrounds it is focused on a core set of Appalachian native plants that we're referring to as forest botanicals. These are plants that by and large are found on forest land throughout Appalachia, although in some cases you'll find them growing in open conditions or along the edge of a forest. By and large, you can think of them as forest plants primarily, and then secondarily, some of them do grow outside of the forest in some cases. And so when we talk about forest farming of medicinal plants or the cultivation of medicinal plants in general, it's important to keep in mind that while there are hundreds of plants that one could choose from to grow for commercial purposes, this project and the trainings around it are focused on a core set of plants. There are about 15 in total that are found throughout Appalachia, and most of which have very strong market demand, although it may be new to you that people actually buy and sell these things. So on your screen right now, I've got 8 example plants listed, some of which you've probably heard about, such as American Ginseng and perhaps bloodroot. Others may be new to you, such as stoneroot or cranesbill. These are just 8 of, as I said, about 15 or so botanicals that are sourced primarily from wild collectors throughout Appalachia that are found on forest lands, some of which are also being cultivated to a small degree, such as American Ginseng in places like Wisconsin, United States, Ontario, Canada, and to some degree on other continents such as China, Australia, and so on. These botanicals all have very strong markets, some stronger than others, and many people are surprised when they hear that there are markets, for example, for mayapple or for wild yam. Indeed, many of these plants are unknown to the broad consumer public, but they do have very strong demand within the herbal practitioner world. So when we think about the markets and where they are located, pretty much they're found throughout Appalachia, and there's different levels that one can deal with in terms of selling into the supply chain. I've got on your screen right now examples of different types of market outlets that you can find. For example, on your lower right-hand side, you'll see the TNT fur buyers. These are local mom-and-pop operations that are scattered throughout Appalachia that typically buy furs, deer hides, seeds, and in many cases, plants such as ginseng and other roots. We also have other types of buyers that are referred more to as regional consolidators or aggregators. I'll come back to that in the next slide, that are a little bit more restricted in terms of where you can find them, but they are further up the supply chain, if you will, and often only deal with folks with large amounts of product to sell rather than small amounts. And then, of course, in this day and age, you can find plenty of people that are available on the internet that are buying roots, selling roots, either through websites and other types of internet applications or on other types of brokerage sites. You might think of eBay or something along those lines. The way that this market chain works is typically you as a collector or grower, see depicted on the lower end of your screen, will sell to a local buyer, sometimes referred to as a country root buyer or a country dealer, and they in turn will pass that product further up the chain to a regional consolidator or an aggregator. These are folks like American Botanicals who will buy rather large lots of root and seek to fill orders that are placed by manufacturers or distributors of bulk roots and other products. And those folks in turn sell, of course, to consumers, either by manufacturing teas, tinctures, or some other type of product, or in the case of a bulk distributor, they are simply turning around and reselling that product as a raw product, if you will, a pound of raw black cohosh root that you can in turn make into tea or tincture yourself. And so everywhere along this supply chain, there are, of course, shortcuts, there are middlemen, and it's important to think about as a producer who you're going to sell to before you even begin to plant or dig any of these plants. You should be thinking about what's the best option for you, and in many cases, how much time and effort you want to put into handling the product. The local buyer is going to be a lot easier to deal with in terms of setting up restrictions or having requirements around the quality and the preferences around that product that you're going to sell to them. In other words, they will oftentimes just buy the product even green or fresh, as long as it's just washed, at least in some sort of cursory way. And you can contrast that with someone further up the chain, such as a manufacturer or indeed the consumer, who are often looking for a product that is much more refined in terms of how it was prepared and whether it meets regulatory compliance associated with FDA regulations such as good manufacturing practices. All of these forest botanicals, it must be kept in mind, are not weeds. And so in this slide, I'm just simply highlighting the fact that American ginseng is a very different beast than dandelion. And many of these plants should be thought of in the same regard. They are wild collected primarily because they, in many cases, have a challenging time to cultivate them, but also because they can be quite fussy about how and where they're cultivated, as well as the length of time it takes to actually get the crop to mature. So in the case of American ginseng, for example, under forest-grown conditions, whether it's cultivated or wild collected, you're typically looking at 5 to 6 years minimum before the plants can be harvested for commercial scale. When the plants are cultivated outside of the forest under artificial shade, that can be trimmed off a little bit to 4, sometimes 5 years, but you're still looking at multiple years before you can actually dig and harvest the product. It's very different than most other herbs that are bought and sold in the herbal marketplace, including dandelion, which in most cases can be grown as annuals or biennials over 2 years. And so in that regard, you can invest minimally in terms of your time and the overhead that you put into a crop, because you can plant in the spring and in many cases harvest in the fall. If you were to plant ginseng or black cohosh or bloodroots, you would be planting in summer or fall, and you might not harvest for 5 years later. So it's very important as a producer to think about the economics of growing these plants. We'll have a paper available should anybody want to get into the details of what I'm about to review. That was published several years ago by myself and a colleague here at Penn State University. You'll see that paper listed on your screen right now. And basically what we did is worked with existing producers as well as data that had been procured during growing trials, either academically produced, so for research, or in many cases from growers themselves who are sharing data around their production. So we fed all of that into some financial models, and I'm going to share a couple of those models with you just to get you to think about some of the constraints as well as the opportunities that are associated with growing many of these plants. And the first constraint is obvious perhaps from the title of the paper that's on your screen right now, which is that there are constraints to growing many of these plants due simply to a lack of profitability, not a lack of markets. Many plants have very deep markets. There's not enough product to actually meet demand in a typical year. Companies are constantly seeking high quality, consistent material. But unfortunately, the profitability is very low around many of these botanicals, primarily because they're still wild collected from Appalachia. And wild collection tends to undercut the ability for people to actually invest in cultivation of these plants. So I'm going to share a couple of different models for plants just to highlight what I'm referring to. The first one is from American Ginseng. We call this a sensitivity analysis model. This is a histogram of break-even prices for American ginseng. In other words, what would be the amount per pound dry of American ginseng that you would need to get in order to break even from your investment in a woods cultivated type of production system. And so what you see all the way over on the left, illustrated by the white histogram bars, are the average minimum and maximum prices when adjusted for inflation paid to producers between the years 1990 and 2005. This paper was published in 2008. And you can see that the range in prices that was paid during that time period was anywhere from about $250 to nearly $600 a pound for dried American ginseng grown in the forest, with an average price of about $400 a pound. Now, I'll stress that that was adjusted for inflation without getting into too much detail about that. That means all of the prices during that 15-year period were brought to the same price point reflected in 2005. In other words, adjusting for the value of the dollar and that change in the value of the dollar over time. And so if you are a long-time producer already in American ginseng, you may recognize that the prices are often much higher than that. That's because you're looking at the real market price rather than one that is adjusted for inflation. So let's set that aside for a moment and just look at the model. What you can see illustrated in the green histogram bars are a variety of scenarios when ginseng is grown from seed. And with the yellow bars all the way to the right, you can see a variety of different price points or break-even prices when American ginseng is grown from transplants. And so let me walk you through what all of those bars mean. Typically, when we talk about growing American ginseng in the forest, we're looking at a 5 to 6 year time horizon. And most people think 6 years is pretty much your minimum before you can harvest wild or wild simulated ginseng from a forested environment. So what we've got with that first green bar is $196 break-even price based on a 6-year production cycle. Seed was planted in year 1 and harvested in year 6 in this model, and that includes all of the production costs. In other words, you had to buy stock, you invested annually in maintaining the crop, and basically you harvested at the minimum that most people will feel that needs to be grown for 6 years. So your break-even price would be $196. When you compare that to the market prices, the historic market prices to the left, you'll notice that that is still a production price point that's below what the market was paying. So in other words, no matter how you produce it, using a 6-year model, paying for that seed and investing annually in some type of maintenance, you're still able to make at a minimum price that was paid during that 15-year period, around $50, a little more, $50 per pound. If you bump over to the next histogram, you'll see EH with 4 in parentheses. That is, again, production from seed, but let's pretend under the best case scenario, which is typically thought of as a cultivated scenario outside of the forest, let's pretend that we could get that type of production in the forest and we were able to grow the plant in 4 years. So we were able to trim 2 years off. That would bring our break-even price down to about $154 a pound. And again, we would still be making money here about $100 a pound using that production cycle. So in other words, you paid for the stock, you did annual maintenance, but you were able to trim 2 years off of the production timeline, and that saves you $50, if you will, or $25 a year. NSC is no stock cost. That's if you already had seed from your forest, that is, you had plants there, whether they were cultivated or wild, and you didn't have to buy that seed, then your break-even price would be about $194 a pound. No annual costs. That means that you didn't do anything. You planted that seed in year 1 and harvested it in year 6, and your production costs dropped significantly. You can see that your break-even price would be about $57. So, in other words, most of your costs wrapped up in your maintenance. And then the most parsimonious model, if you will, is illustrated all the way to the right in the green bars, and that's if you were able to do everything correctly in terms of efficiency, that you were able to get the plants harvested in 4 years, grown and harvested in 4 years. You didn't have to buy the stock, and you didn't do or didn't need to do much in the way of maintenance during those 4 years. Your break-even price per pound would be about $53 a pound. And so ultimately then you're making, if you look at the minimum price again, paid between 1990 and 2005, you're making about $200 a pound for your effort. Okay. And so the same thing is replicated with transplants on the right. That is, instead of growing from seed, you bought some small plants, maybe 1 or 2 year plants, and planted those. And you can see in most cases that drives your cost up a little bit because of the higher entry-level price point, if you will, or the investment in terms of growing these plants for market using transplants versus seed. And so bottom line is, if you look at a model like this, that American ginseng is one of the most widely cultivated of the plants right now because simply it is profitable. Many people can grow it in a variety of different scenarios, seed or transplants, a variety of different kinds of investment, labor, and planting stock. And generally speaking, there's money to be made from American ginseng because of the high prices that are paid for that plant. And now I'm going to talk more in a moment about some emerging opportunities, but let's just take a pause here and say that most of the ginseng is propped up in terms of the price by an export market, primarily based in Taiwan or Hong Kong and the Orient. And so those prices of $600 a pound for ginseng, those are prices that are paid overseas by Asian consumers, by Asian traders. And so that market is a very niche market. It does not exist, as I'll talk more about, for all of the other botanicals that we can find on forest lands in Appalachia. And so many of these other forest botanicals have very different market destinations and very different price points. In order to deal with some of the export challenges in many years or concerns around exporting ginseng to the Orient, we developed a program here in Pennsylvania that is now being expanded throughout Appalachia. It's called the Forest Grown Program. It's a labeling program, much like certification for organic cultivation is. It is based out of Pennsylvania, but that's just the administrative home. It can be, you can be as a producer inspected and verified anywhere throughout Appalachia, and we're currently in the process of expanding the inspection capabilities and so on. But at any rate, that program was developed about 4 years ago and launched for American Ginseng as the first product in that supply chain, with the idea that we would start to build a domestic ginseng marketplace that pays commensurate prices to the Oriental consumers. So in other words, $600 a pound here in the United States, just like is paid overseas. That market is a slow-growing market. We are using the verification process and labeling as a way to assure consumers that when they are buying this product, they are buying not only certified forest grown, but they're buying, in many cases, organic ginseng, and they can feel good about it. As you can see on the packaging here from Mountain Rose Herbs, protecting the wild is in your hands. The idea here is that we want people to feel good about the botanicals that they're buying. We want them to feel good about the source of them and the quality associated with the product. And so this program was launched primarily around ginseng about 4 years ago. And as I'll talk more about in a couple of slides, is being expanded to other botanicals in addition to ginseng. So let's return to one more example of sensitivity analysis around a common traded forest botanical, in this case black cohosh. And you should already have a sense of what's being illustrated here from what I just showed you with American ginseng, but let me just quickly highlight the notable differences. First of all, notice that the historic prices between 1990 and 2005 ranged between $1 and $3, so significantly different price point paid by the market, hundreds of dollars less paid by traders for this particular commodity. However, when you look at the cost of production, you'll see it is in many cases lower than the cost of production for ginseng, but the time horizon is very similar, and more importantly, all of the break-even prices that you see illustrated there are far above the historic prices paid for black cohosh by root buyers operating throughout Appalachia. In other words, even under the best, most efficient conditions, illustrated again all the way by the far right histograms, whether from seed or transplant, the lowest break-even price that we could model, again using real-world data, was about $25 a pound to break even on your investment for growing black cohosh, and the most that root buyers paid during the 15-year period, 1990 to 2005, was about $3. So for your investment, you would be losing about $22 a pound. And so that is not obviously a good economic scenario. You're losing money rather than making money. And so why would anybody want to invest in growing these plants? That's a really great question that I just raised, and it's one that we'll explore in depth at the workshops, the upcoming workshops that you'll be attending. And suffice it to say for now that there's a variety of different market outlets that we can turn to in addition to the mom and pop root buyers that are only paying $3 a pound. And so this is where it becomes very critical for you as a producer to think about if you are interested in growing a plant like black cohosh, and even if our model is slightly off, even if your break-even price was $15 a pound, you would still be losing money selling to your local mom and pop root buyer. So it's very important to think about the market outlet and exactly what you want to do with these plants if you're going to invest in growing them or wild collecting them or wild stewarding them, because in many cases, wild collected product continues to flood the market with product that continues to drag the price down. So one of the emerging opportunities has to do with the program I just mentioned, the Forest Grown Verification Program. Beginning this year, 2016, the program is being expanded beyond American ginseng to include all of the plants that you see listed there, which is golden seal, black cohosh, blue cohosh, wild yam, false unicorn root, bloodroot, ramps or wild leek, wood geranium, stone root, Solomon seal. All of these have ready markets out there. That is, there's quite a bit of demand for all of these products. Almost All of them, with the exception of American Ginseng and Golden Seal, are by and large unprofitable if cultivated for the entry-level producer. And so we're looking at different types of market outlets and exploring different types of market outlets to make them more profitable. And one of those outlets is the Forest Grown Verification Program, working with companies like Mountain Rose Herbs out of Eugene, Oregon. We're working with companies to raise awareness about the source of these plants and to prop up, if you will, the price using price premiums, using the Forest Grown Labeling Initiative as our verification mechanism to ensure that the consumer that is willing to pay a premium for, let's say, forest-grown organic black cohosh is actually getting a higher quality product that's grown and harvested in a sustainable and legal manner. And so this is an initiative that involves a variety of different partners. It will be discussed in quite a bit more detail at the workshops. Suffice it to say for now that this may be one of the best hopes for producers who are simply interested in growing the plants and selling them rather than turning them into value-added products such as tinctures and capsules and other things. And in this case, we're working with companies like Mountain Rose to secure a higher price so that it is profitable to grow and manage plants like black cohosh. But this is all being developed right now, and it's all being done with a variety of different partners that are assisting with different elements of the consumer education, inspecting, development of standards, and last but not least, of course, training people on how to grow and get into this program. In addition to the Forest Grown program, there are a variety of different market outlets, and here you have a slide that illustrates a lot of information, but let's just tease it apart very quickly. On the left side, you see the desired market outlets. So basically the way you can think of this is there are four major buckets, if you will, as a producer that you could sell your roots into. We were just talking about the Forest Grown program that cuts pretty much across all of these, although one can envision that it may be a little bit more attractive to people who are large volume fruit growers, for example. Nonetheless, these market outlets are basically divided into four groups. We have large volume root buyers. These would be your regional consolidators or aggregators that we talked about at the beginning, such as American Botanicals, or here I have Ed Fletcher, who is a North Carolina buyer. This would also include some herb companies that are willing to deal with producers of large volumes of product. This includes companies like Mountain Rose Herbs out of Eugene, Oregon. We also have small volume buyers. These would be your mom and pop local root buyers that we talked about already. But it would also include some perhaps more profitable smaller market outlets, including direct sales to herbalists and herbal apothecaries associated with different schools, for example. We also have then value-added production as an opportunity. These would be things like tinctures, capsules, foods, etc. That would be a third market opportunity. And then a fourth market opportunity that we shouldn't lose track of is a nursery production. Many of these plants are grown and bought and sold within the nursery trade for, in some cases, medicinal plants production, but in many cases simply for horticultural curiosities or for ornamental purposes. And so that can be quite profitable, but also necessitates a different line of thinking in many cases than medicinal plant production per se. At the upcoming workshops, we'll be teasing apart the opportunities associated with all of these different types of outlets and getting into some of the relevant topics that you see listed on the right. So, for example, if you were to become a large volume root producer, someone who wants to sell, let's say, 100 pounds of black cohosh a year or more to a company like Mountain Rose Herbs, then all of or most of the topics on the right are going to be important for you to at least become familiar with, if not fully understand. These include things like good manufacturing practices, which are regulated upon the companies by the FDA. You would want to become familiar with opportunities like organic certification, forest growing verification, of course, how to handle the product once you get it out of the ground. So the harvesting, drying, and packaging basics and technology are very, very important. Financial planning, for reasons we just talked about, you would want to know what your investment is and what you would get back from that investment and where the efficiencies are in your production that you could find to help bolster the bottom line. You might be interested in working with cooperatives or within cooperatives in order to boost the amount of volume of material that you have available in order to meet particular buyer contracts, for example. As we go down below to the other markets, you'll see that all of the above pieces of information or topics are relevant, but in addition, there are other things that one must pay attention to. So if you look at value-added production, you would, of course, want to know about all of the things I just mentioned, but you would also need to know about how to make tinctures and capsules. You need to know about product labeling, that is, what's legal in the United States. You would want to know perhaps about incubator resources, that is, how and where incubators, business incubators are located. For example, commercial kitchens that you could use on a part-time basis or on a fee basis in order to start your business. You would want to look around you for other businesses, case studies, if you will, examples of businesses that are doing something that you are interested in emulating and figuring out, is there a market for me in this region? How can I differ my business? How can I copy what they're doing if it's a successful model, and so on. And of course, with selling value-added products, the most important thing perhaps on this list, aside from just knowing how to grow and harvest plants, is understanding the regulations that may be in play around a particular product, specifically as it relates to the FDA. Okay? And so all of these markets are available. We lump them into four buckets, if you will, and each one carries with it a certain amount of relevant topics that you should become familiar with, some of which you'll need to become intimately familiar with. Others, it may be just understanding a little bit about them will be sufficient. All of these topics will be covered in the upcoming workshops, more or less in great detail. And so, on that note, I am going to close here and say that I am available by email if anybody's got any kind of burning questions. Feel free to contact me specifically if you are interested in obtaining a copy of the economic modeling paper that I put up a slide of. It's quite dense because it is an academic exercise, but nonetheless it might be useful for you to at least take a look at and try and think about some of the numbers and some of the costs and returns associated with these different botanicals. Otherwise, I look forward to meeting you all at one of the upcoming workshops. Thanks for tuning in.
Intensive 1 self-survey. Who am I? Who do I want to be as a forest farmer? Remembering that success in business often comes from goal setting and careful planning, it's time to start thinking about your business model now. Recalling Eric's short introduction on market outlets, where do you want to fit into this scheme? What are your goals for your operation, short-term and long-term? What type of market might you like to sell to? These are all great questions to begin to consider as you start to prepare for your 2-day conference. Pre-workshop Intensive 2, Planting Demonstrations. Intensive 2, Part 1, Planting by Seed Dispersal. In this demonstration, we'll be using ginseng as our demonstration plant.
Preparing a ginseng site in the forest can be quite a challenge. Depending on the site that you're working, most woodland sites, particularly up here in upstate New York, have lots and lots of rocks, and you obviously can't go in and pick every single rock that's in the forest. So you have to kind of work around the outcroppings of rocks. You also want to remove vegetation that's going to compete with the ginseng, which would include a lot of the understory shrubs, Even if they don't compete with them physically for nutrients, they're providing, in some cases, too much shade. So you try to get a rough idea of removing enough small trees and brush so that you allow enough sunlight in for the ginseng to grow well, but not too much sun to get in so that the ginseng burns up and doesn't grow properly. Typically, in the fall of the year, the ideal time to plant ginseng would be right before most of the leaves fall off the maple trees, because you do need to mulch the ginseng with the fallen leaves. So typically in a wild simulated situation, what we'll do is we'll rake back the leaves, generally rake them uphill, because it's easier to get them back on the beds after that, as far an area as we can develop. If it's 25 foot long, that's great. If we can do a 4 foot wide by a 25 foot long strip, rake the leaves above that, and then broadcast the seeds. We're trying to plant about 5 seeds per square foot, with the hope that 3 or 4 years later, through natural attrition, we'll end up with 1 plant per square foot. That way the foliage isn't touching and we don't have to worry so much about diseases. So let's say a 4 foot by 25 foot area, which would be 100 square feet, we would plant about an ounce of seed in that. It's about 500 seeds in an ounce. So again, that works out to about 5 seeds per square foot. The seed is broadcast on the surface of the soil, but as I said, the leaves are raked off, and typically we'll go in with a tool to scratch up the soil, because you do want to ensure that there's contact between the seed and the soil. So after we broadcast the seed, try to uniformly broadcast it by hand. We'll then walk on those beds to make sure that the seeds are pressed into the soil. You don't want to plant the seeds, say, an inch deep. They won't grow at all. So you really want the seeds to be just lightly covered with soil, maybe a half an inch of soil on top of them. And then it's a matter of raking the leaves back on top, hoping it rains, or hoping that more leaves will fall to cover them and provide the winter mulch. I don't think you can have too much mulch, natural mulch on ginseng. I've seen ginseng seedlings push up through 6 or 7 inches of leaf tissue, but the type of leaves is also important. Maple leaves tend to break down, and so 4 or 5, 6 inches of maple leaves is not a problem. Oak leaves tend to pack and compact, so ginseng seeds won't push up through an inch or 2 of oak leaves. They'll basically be smothered, but they will come up through 5 or 6 inches of sugar maple leaves. So the overstory trees are very important in terms of site preparation too. It's another reason why we tend to avoid oak sites, because of the tannic acid that's in the oak leaves. Sugar maple leaves have calcium in them. That's a good thing. Oak leaves have tannic acid in them. They pack down, they compact, and that's a bad thing.
In part 2, we'll be looking at planting by rhizome division.
The bloodroot itself is what we call a spring ephemeral. It has a white, beautiful, star-shaped bloom in the spring of the year. So it grows in a deciduous forest, primarily hardwood, mixed hardwood, some poplar. Doesn't do very good in some of the acid soils. You want a little bit higher pH on this one for it to naturalize. I grow it generationally, so I grow it from seed as well as from root divisions on it. So we have a deciduous forest here. We have a lot of rhododendron. This one doesn't do good under rhododendron unless you really do a good job of cleaning up and changing the pH. Because my pH is about 5.5, I want to raise that up at least a point to where I have more of a slightly acid soil. I use lime, and I use dolomitic limes where I have a higher magnesium content. And then the part of it that is sellable is the root, and this is a very small root. A lot of the bloodroot is a lot bigger in size. This is not really a marketable one. I'd rather have it at least up to 2 inches to harvest, but for today we just pulled a few little bloodroots that were showing up. This is probably a 2-year. I grow it from seed and from divisions. In divisions you need a pretty good size root, and then we'll do a cut for each node. There's a little bud. See, there's a little bud right here on there, and we'll cut that. So at this one we could divide it into 2 in there. So what we've got is we've got 2 very small blood roots that we have dug up, and you can see there's a bud here and a bud here, so we can actually get 2 out of this one. Then I take rid of the stem, so now we've got 2 pieces out of 1 there. Same thing here. I've got a bud, and a bud. Take the stem off, split that into 3. There. But once you've cut the bloodroot, you can see on my hand you've got sap. You see it's coming on here. so it's bleeding, especially in the spring or even in the fall. So I like to use paper if it's a big tray or something. Since we just have this, I just use something with a little bit of absorption, even cloth. I've used cloth before. And then I'll take my blood rootlets that I've divided and then spread them out and let them air dry, because the nutrition is literally on the rootlet itself. About 24 to 48 hours until you get kind of a dry seal on the cut portion and you no longer have any bleeding of sap. See how the red is coming onto my hand from handling these rootlets? And then these will go into a very small bed in the forest where I'm going to be growing them. This is a particular location that's under rhododendrons and mountain laurels. If you're under rhododendrons and mountain laurels, you're going to have an acid soil. So you've got to get rid of that competition, and part of that is limbing up the rhodies, because there's nothing grows under rhodies much, or azaleas. So we got an acid soil. So last year, over a year ago, this entire bed has been calcium has been added. The pH was 5.5. We want to get up around 6.5, somewhere in there, and have a more basic soil to where even though bloodroot grows in acid soil, we'll have a little bit better bulb growth in that. So we've already got that prep done. Now I've got the duff. You can see here there's a lot of leaf matter, and we want to get the duff, the leaf matter, down to the point where we're seeing soil. And this is a sandy loam soil, which is a nice sandy type soil. You can see here we're down to the soil area. So now let's look at our roots. These are roots of bloodroot that have been cut to where we've got 1 to 2 buds per rootlet. At that point, we let them dry for 24, 48 hours, somewhere in there, on a paper towel like these. So these have been prepped. They've kind of healed over just a little bit to where they're ready now for me to lay out. So I want to get some soil. This is a hori-hori knife, and it's got serrations on one side, slice, kind of like a hand trowel. So we just want to just loosen it up just a little bit. Now I've got a nice bed here. And so our roots that we're harvesting are probably right at an inch apart. So I'm going to take these rootlets and going to lay them an inch or so apart, because I want them to grow to that size. So we're actually going to have a small mini garden, so to speak, in a little area that we put. So spread these out. Now we've got a nice evenly spread. So now I'm going to take and just cover them lightly with soil. And you can mark these even with a, so now we're back to the native duff going over top of these, and they are touching the soil at this point. And always mark when you're done what you've done. And I always put my marker on the opposite side of the trail, so when I'm walking the trail, I know that this bloodroot planting is in front of this marker. So I know right here is where they've been planted. So now we'll water them in. And we're ready. And just wait for them to grow.
Now that we've had an introduction to forest farming, a look at some of the main plants that are traded in the industry, and a little bit of an in-depth look at market options for selling raw material and planting, let's go over what some of the workshops will be talking about. Topics in the workshops will include site selection, preparation and maintenance, harvest, post-harvest handling and processing, value-added production of raw materials, marketing and business planning, certification and verification program options for growers, and industry overview. Activities at workshops will include forest walks, demonstrations, hands-on demonstrations, discussion forums, and site visitations. Please be sure to view the agenda for your specific event to obtain detailed information on program content. Still have questions? Or perhaps you have more questions after viewing this preparatory program? Don't worry. Come to your event prepared to go in-depth into these topics and more, with experts on hand to assist you and answer questions as you prepare to start or expand your forest farming operations. We look forward to seeing you soon. Still curious and don't want to wait for your event to get more information? Be sure to check out the ABFFC website at www.forestfarmers.org for more information. Consider becoming a coalition member if you aren't already. Membership is free and gives you access to a large collection of resources that dig in deep to these topics and allows you to connect with other forest farmers via the forum. It also gives opportunities for technical assistance through our Ask an Expert forum. See you soon!